Right, good evening, everybody. It is the Easthampton Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. It is Thursday, May 27th at 6:08 p.m. Welcome. Well, since we're starting a couple minutes late, I propose we defer the approval of the April meeting minutes to later in the meeting. We can do that later. Okay, everybody right with that? All right. So thank you, Mayor LaChapelle and Councillor Peak for joining us. And I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much for making this possible. And I really wanted to be before this group before tonight, but happy to be here. And I sent Jenna and Jamie just a quick memo to follow up what I'm about to speak to. If it wants to be shared, it's not lightning, but so my office with developers have been pursuing both, I would say formally with existing projects, but also marketing possible affordable housing projects, starting at, honestly, modestly at 60% AMI up to 120. The housing needs and production study that was done by Barrett and Associates, Jeff, correct me on any detail, was really helpful, and it was affirmed by the Greater Springfield Housing and Demographic Study that was just completed with UMass and the Donahue Institute, which was contributed to, that report was contributed to by Councillor Tom Peak. And my efforts have been with little luck or result. Fast forward to the times of COVID, coming out of COVID, CARE Act, and this idea of shovel ready. In the next version of federal help, it is housing in populations that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID in all sorts of different ways, and that cities and towns have the opportunity to be innovative with those monies. City Hall's overwhelmed. There's just no other way to say it. It seems that it would be great to have millions of dollars floating around in federal and state money to take care of things, and it is, but the compliance measures are great. And before COVID, quite honestly, and I think Jeff and Jamie will attest, I was pushing pretty hard for a whole bunch of different grants, and fortunately, second consequence, unfortunately, we got them all, and the compliance is really high. I'm asking for the support of this partnership to help me and planning, as well as the city council, investigate innovative tools to help expand housing options for our city. So one, that's just a very general ask, but two, the more that I look into it, and Councillor Peak has looked into it, and Planner Bagg and Assistant Planner Webb has looked into it, we either overshoot some categories for rural communities, or we are under what is urban, and that has been a difficulty talking to affordable housing developers, because one, we can't assure them 40 units or whatever they need to make it worth their while. We also don't have land automatically ready to do that. And we keep getting innovative proposals, but honestly, the proposals are fantastic, but our land inventory is not pre-development ready. And we've talked a lot about, just informally in our leadership team, but I've been doing a lot of work with HUD and the National League of Cities Mayors Group are being innovative and looking at tools like the Affordable Housing Trust and Land Trust and Community Investment Trust, because our housing, obviously there's an urgent need now. Like I think all of us could just like tick off the the anecdotal, but also the data-based research of what we need and where we have failed. But then there's this whole other half generation of issues coming at us, and we have nothing really in place to address that. And there are, I think there's energy and interest and money to look at that. I was just on a really fascinating webinar about cooperative housing and cooperative housing development in conjunction with a city. And my twist on that, and I'll throw, Tom, I didn't tell you about this, I'm sorry. I just put it together. But I also wonder, about co-ops, like you have owner co-ops, but also Easthampton has a fair amount of worker co-ops. And if we could help find land and purchase land for a co-op that was for, AMI 40% up or whatnot, but also was a worker co-op owned by disenfranchised members of the construction and development community, women-owned, LGBT, AAPI, African-American. I just think on the scale that Easthampton is at 16,000, we could pull something like that off and meet, our commitment to equity, but more importantly, meet a commitment to affordable housing versus what a housing that is affordable. I'm learning the difference, Jenna, between those two. It's tricky. I get it now. At first I was like, oh, it's the same. I was like, no, it's not the same thing. So that is my simple ask, and I'd like to work in partnership with this group because also I feel just on the partnership is a very unique set of experiences and expertise, and in a group that has been watching this issue and has been committed to this issue in Easthampton for quite some time. So why reinvent the wheel? And I would prefer if the committee is open to it to supply with this committee with a little help. Whether that's just research or whatnot, and help to, Jamie, who I know is always standing with you, to kind of push forward these explorations, because I do think we have a moment in, dramatic as it sounds, we have a moment in this generation to maybe do something that helps a generation we will never know in housing. And that sounds, PBS grand, but I do believe it's true. And we have a while to, the money coming at us, we have until 2026 to spend. And that includes buying property, and that includes creating innovative partnerships. And I will be very forthright. And that has more to do with the steroids I'm on for, I got IV, poison ivy in my throat and eyes, so I'm feeling bold, and haven't slept for 5 days. I just think that this group, working with planning and the mayor's office with a little consultant support, we have the best idea of what we need. And all respect to bigger regional agencies that we will need going forward. I think the ideas germinate here and can best be sustainable coming out from us rather than bringing more information in. So at this point, with you're okay, Madam Chair, Councillor Peak, I know has some thoughts as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, yeah, I mean, where we sort of this idea from my perspective started when I was looking at the mayor's State of the City address, and one of the things that she was talking about is examining the idea of an affordable housing trust. And it was either Jenna or Jackie who had sent me a bunch of webinars on those trusts, and think the Mass Housing Partnership had put together that I had watched, and I got really interested in the idea of just having an just a local organization that can sort of do some of, maybe be involved on some of the levels where right now we're having to ask other people to do stuff, and maybe they're not interested in the stuff that we want to do. So this is something where, I spoke to the mayor. I was like, is this something you're interested in? Should we do this? And we were talking about what that would be like on the council level. And I realized it really is kind of I looked at sort of what these looked like in a lot of different communities, and what we kind of realized is there's a lot of different ways to do this, in terms of how they're organized, in terms of what their actual mission is. And so sort of that was the start of this conversation about wanting to get in front of you, was saying, well, we actually have this whole advisory board that does housing stuff. What if we came to them and asked whether you'd be interested in potentially workshopping a proposal, and I can drop in and make myself available to the extent that that's helpful. And at the end, if there's something that everyone feels good about, I can then take that and introduce it to the council. But I feel like if we're going to do something like this, it'll be a better plan, and it'll have more political weight and authority coming from a body like sort of a non-political advisory body like this, than if it's just like me throwing something out there. Just in general, I think that makes, with all this housing stuff, we all know it's politically, it can be politically touchy. And I do think that having it come from like an advisory body like this will give it a sort of authority that'll make it easier to happen. It'll also make it probably a better constituted thing, because the last thing we'd want is to set something like this up and then have it not have it sort of land flat. That would probably set us back in some important ways. And then, as the mayor had said, as we went on, there's these other various sort of instruments and vehicles for doing this sort of development that also exist out there. And so I guess from the point of view of me as a counselor, the way that my request sort of dovetails with the mayor's is like, I would really like to, these things seem like promising ideas. And if you agree that they're promising ideas, I'd like to get the wheels rolling eventually on the council level to actually implement something like this and figure out what resources it needs and what it needs to be set up to do. But I do think that you're okay with it. The proposal would be better and stronger if it came out of this committee. So I guess that's our question, is that something you'd be interested in taking on, knowing that it probably would be kind of a big lift?
I think Kate has a question, but I'll also say that I think this is actually coming at a really interesting time, this request to the Housing Partnership, because we have been really looking at Cpa's Municipal Engagement Initiative as a source of technical assistance for the partnership for the city of Easthampton around affordable housing issues. So Kate, Jamie, and I went to some open office hours that the program has to talk to one of their program associates about kind of what is the program, which we were sort of a little bit murky about. And we talked about ways that Cpa, it's actually free. You do apply for it, but Cpa provides various levels of technical support, from like what they call, light to sort of an intensive 18-month process where we would, collectively as a city with the mayor's office and the planning department and the council sort of decide what are the things that we want help with. And so it could be things like creating an affordable housing trust. It could be things like, what are some other ways, co-ops or, other sort of, innovative strategies, particularly if could be money available to implement some of those strategies. So, I think this is coming at a great time for us. I think the timing of when Chapa's Municipal Engagement Initiative program is still a little bit unknown. We're waiting to hear when the intensive applications would be available. It might not be until 2022. And so I think that then we need to have a conversation about other things that we can do before that, particularly if the housing trust idea is something that, you know, you don't want to wait 7 months to get started. But personally, I mean, I think that Easthampton would be a really attractive applicant to Chapa because we are in Western Mass. A lot of the cities and towns that they've worked with are like Arlington and Cambridge and Medford. And, you know, it would be really important for them to also, you know, focus on a city that's, you know, outside of, you know, 495. So, I mean, those are my initial thoughts. I don't know if anyone else, any members have questions or comments. I know Kate had a question about Councilor Peak, if you could explain more about what workshopping means.
Yeah, fair enough. Wait, do you want to expand upon that, or should I try?
I can only Zoom, I can only chat to Jana. So I just, if you could, you're speaking in very broad terms, and I appreciate this. This is all very exciting, but if you could speak more specifically about kind of what you were thinking that partnership would look like. And when you're talking about heavy lifting, what specifically you're kind of talking about. So maybe even use an example or would be helpful.
I mean,
and I know we're recorded, but.
Sure. To start, this is a volunteer committee, so whatever you can do is appreciated. What I think the dream scenario for me would look like would be to produce a proposal for what an affordable housing trust would look like in Easthampton. Mm-hmm. Would it, like, what sort of people it would comprise, like how its organization would be, what its funding sources would be, and what kind of projects it would pursue. That's sort of like a broad, and then bring something like that, you know, that's something that then I could work with to actually turn that into a measure that I could bring before the city council to actually get something like that established. If that's too big of an ask, then I'm sure we could think of something else. But that's the general thought that I had on it, is that I've watched a couple webinars on this, but I know that there's a lot of knowledge in this room and a lot of people who know more about this than I do. And so that would be where I'd ideally like to start. Is like, if we were to do something like this, how would you do it? What would it look like?
I mean, and I think if I could just jump in here on that, Kate, and you're very distracting because you look like your sister, so who I know very well, and your hair is short and curly, and Sarah's, it took me forever to figure out that Sarah was the mother of Hannah. Like that was hard for me. That I'm not good on social media. But that said, a lot of times for just in the state process and federal process, it's about, you know, folks like Jamie, Jeff, and myself, maybe pulling in a city councilor and saying, this is the housing program available. This is how we think it applies. Hey, housing partnership, what do you think? And there's feedback that's good, but it's also counter to our original assumptions. So I feel in the current environment between just state and federal stuff, that there's an opportunity for Easthampton to say, this is all great government grabble, but we actually have a record of doing stuff. And our affordable housing partnership and partners that we have in town, even developers, will go with this, but your rules are ridiculous and they're slow. You know, no personal opinion there. I know Jeff is chewing. He's so afraid what I'm going to say next. Just a minute. But so I just want to share something that, you know, it's a public record or whatnot, but I had a conversation with the lieutenant governor, and she happened to call me after a meeting with Representative Kerry and Senator Vilas on the top of Building 5 at 1 Ferry Street with Mike Michon. And you know, like Mike's promise, like affordable housing, and we were kind of pitching, and we're like, look, if we could do this and we could do that, and the rep in Senate to the senator, to no fault of their own, was like, well, we have bills in process, and leave it to a developer to look at them and say, so you have nothing for me, and what you have, I will be retired. I'm like, and I looked at them, and they both were like, yeah, basically. So the lieutenant governor happened to call me about something else. And I said, look, I just need 5 minutes of complete like venting, and talked about One Ferry and the wish of the community and what we want to do. And yes, it's a for-profit. I mean, I understand Mike Michon is not benevolent. I mean, he is not Santa Claus as a developer for affordable housing. I think, but I've got nothing that entices him. Like, help me. And you changed workforce housing. I mean, the thing I got him to, you changed it from a direct cash grant to soft debt. Like, it messed up his pro forma. So she said, can you explain it in 1 page? I was like, yes. She goes, send it to my private email within 12 hours. And I did. We have a meeting coming up now with DHCD or whatnot, and her rep, to talk about why affordable housing can't work for One Ferry's pro forma. And now that we've got that attention, we have a developer now who wants to pay attention and is talking about interesting. So I'm not saying it's a slam dunk or whatnot, but we're kind of pushing the light fantastic. I think that inequity in the city on a whole bunch of different levels, it relates to the ARPA money. I think it relates to cannabis money. I think there's a lot of pre-development work we can do that actually Jeff and Jamie have taught me all about. I didn't even know what that was about, like around the schools, but around some other things in One Ferry Street. But it's also allowed me to say to some development projects in the mills outside of One Ferry, like, you have no idea what you're committing to, and we don't want to spend 6 months talking to you about it when we know you can't afford to do it. So, you know, to start with this group and go forward, especially with the strong connection with Jamie and CPA money and the planning department, I don't know. I think we have 10 months to do something, like at least get something seeded that would take maybe 4 or 5 years, not to mention, Jenna, like we've gone back and forth of this pipeline of affordable housing developers and whatnot. So that's all I have to say.
Jeff, do you want?
I want to try to build on what the mayor was saying. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that we've kind of all, I'm guessing we've all talked about this, but you know, the housing trust, the formation of a housing trust and continuing on with a trust by itself, like it doesn't accomplish what we want by itself. But as we really have this newer, like a more engaged focus on housing, it's multiple prongs, and we really have to be activating a lot of different things. And the trust is one thing that I think we've all looked back like 7 years ago, and you know, what if we had formed it 7 years ago? Could it be functioning today with money in it and being active? So like, we probably don't want to lose another chance of reviewing it now, so that 7 years from now, or you know, maybe less, but we'll have that tool functioning, ready, and maybe there's money in there. I think, you know, Laura, you know, and others have talked, like the trust takes some time. It takes a lot of nurturing, and I think to Councilor Peak's point, we have to realize what happens after we form it too. So it's an investment. You know, just looking around the planning department, as Kay mentioned a lot, but it's really like, you know, it's me and Jamie. So like, we have to just also think about capacity building. But I think that's why like Laura's here to look at pre-development activities. And if we're looking at, you know, supporting renters, you know, we're you know, first-time home buyers, like as we start to really build all these different tools, we actually would have some housing programs that we don't currently have much going on in terms of that. So those are all things that, you know, I think with the mayor's leadership, with the energy from city council, and then with the partnership from the planning department, you know, if we're all moving forward in those directions together, I think that's where we can start to be really effective. I think, the mayor's been working hard on with Ferry Street, and we're looking at the schools, and I think that's one of the things that DHCD and Boston need to realize is that we have a hard time getting 40 units crammed into small lots. So it's really hard. And then Laura, in what Valley CDC is going to talk about is we also have some really large parcels that are on the market, and trying to look at, are we prepared? Do we know what those can do? And how do we kind of scope, like we have to support housing and support our existing housing and make it affordable, but we have to build more too. So, all these things kind of work together, but it's a lot. It's a lifting up of all these housing programs. It's going to take a little bit of,
and I think that, yeah, I mean, I also think, the community commitment and passion and vision starts with boards, like partnership that we're talking to now. And it's important to start there. And very, probably I just look at some of the people who are on this call who have much more experience with, state agencies and whatnot. We have a window. Like it's so fortunate. Like in the last 4 years, we've had a couple of windows to do some really unique things. And I think for housing, this is something that we can really look at and make sustainable. I'm very wary of creating something that is too study specific. So by 2026, when basically all of the COVID related money disappears, or we have to spend it, like there's some stuff that we could do. And I think the pre-development activity around these 3 schools, it's like, okay, so we really need to look at this. While we're looking at this, I think as a city, we've done very well buying open space for open space, and that's very important. But I think maybe we need to pivot and buy space for housing, even if we sit there on it, which is funny because the first time JP Kwasinski said that on council, Tom, I was like, oh, we are not a holding company. I went right to private sector, but right now the federal government is like, no, use this money to buy stuff. So you can only put like protected for housing. And my dreams, which you guys can tell me is completely not practical, is to identify small lots throughout the city that could be developed specifically as first-time home buyer, but also look at Pleasant Green in particular, which Jeff will tell you is my obsession, and protect it from what will happen sooner rather than later. Is, you can't have $450,000 condominiums, 1/16 of a mile away from a neighborhood and expect that neighborhood to, retain its original, socioeconomic characteristics, unless we step in and say, no, actually, that's what it's going to be. So those are my 2. And the capacity is just, within city government isn't there, but I think it starts, there's a lot of work, as Jeff and Jamie very well, tell me with all, data and whatnot, is it's pre-development activity. It's like, there are so many smaller steps that we need to start right now, if that's what Easthampton is asking for. And so I'm just looking at, you guys and great conversations with Councilor Peak about, he and I on the elected level can be great advocates for this. Councilor Peak and I are pretty good Boston buddies, going to, fight the fight. And you guys have the technical experience. So, the request is out there, and there's a, I'm not saying bazillions, but there's some money to get you some clerical support and admin support. I'm not saying consultant Jeff, Jamie. I'm saying okay, so this is what a cooperative could look like. Like, someone's got to go and put that in a folder for us on a shared drive or whatnot. Or do we qualify I can figure that out from my budget, Jeff, not yours, to get you that support. But Jeff, Jamie, Tom, and I need help. We need the big minds that you guys have.
Okay. Go ahead, Brad.
So I got disconnected for a little bit, so maybe you'd already covered this, but what is your expected timeline for when you would like to see this kind of information? Because, if I have, the next 5 months or so, I'm going to be going into a housing policy course at UMass that goes into the fall.
Yep.
So I could utilize the expertise of the students who are all regional planning majors and the curriculum to kind of take a look at, what we have available. And I can kind of gear my coursework towards, exploring these things.
Yeah.
But that's only if we have, that amount of time, or if you were looking for something sooner.
No, we're looking, so the cannabis money that could be appropriate for these expenditures is already in the bank, and it would be the council that would have to approve an appropriation to fund. The ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan Act money, we should get in the next 3 weeks. And what the state and the federal authorities are telling us is, don't get ready to just get it and spend like we did with the CARE Act, but they've actually given us a rubric of each category, including housing, of why we would want to do this and how to justify it and allow us to get data to support what we want to do. And candidly, Easthampton we just fall in between everything. We're not rural, in some in opportunity zones, we weren't rural, but then in food deserts we were, and we got new, it's crazy. So it's not a rush. It's more about, I feel with the ARPA money, it's what's really right for Easthampton, right? So maybe a community investment, maybe that's not the vehicle, or like Jeff and I were talking, and actually Tom and I were talking about the different variations, like a community investment trust isn't one monolith, but can look a whole bunch in different ways. So no, I would say, Brad, that it's the timeline is a little bit about what makes, the sense for this group and for the city. And maybe Jeff and Jamie have a lot of extra time. I don't think so. So they're not in a rush. And that's why we're behind you. And I know Councilor Peak probably has some kind of a conflict, but the Donahue Institute, which Councilor Peak was professionally on around housing and demographics and projecting to 2025, really affirmed a lot of what this group has been talking about housing, about aging, about, just where people are income's going to be. And I think there's some support to follow up with UMass Amherst, as well as a partnership that we're about to announce with the LGBT Chamber of Commerce and the Black Entrepreneurial Chamber of Commerce of Massachusetts around wealth generation that can lead to housing ownership production. And that's a whole, that's a whole other meeting. That's, that's, Jackie, what is that? That's a breakfast at Silver Spoon. So we'd have to post it as a public meeting and take over the picnic tables. But there's a lot of exciting going about that. But it's what, you guys seem to have insight from your different perspectives of what makes sense for Easthampton in the context of pre-development or preceding like money-wise from fiscal year, let's say January 1st, 2022, to make a plan and press go on that plan by January 2023.
Okay.
So it's not we have this grand up. I feel like it's not like One Ferry Street with MassWorks, where we got everything through in 9 weeks. It's more about what is sustainable, what is right for Easthampton, and yeah, the data. It surprised me out of the Donahue Institute. I kind of knew it was going to happen, but the extent of population aging and housing needs and needing, was really insightful. And certainly I'm sure Tom or Jeff can share that study with the group if you don't have it already.
Sure. Yeah, I totally could.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Councilor Peak, did you want to say something else?
No, I know that we've gone over our allotted time, but
I know. I was like,
so I don't know if we need we just kind of want. I just kind of wanted to come in and sort of just plant that idea in your heads. I know that you have some other stuff and to get to tonight, and you'll probably want to just confer. But if so we can keep talking. But just if there is an interest in sort of helping to work through a proposal like that, then that's something that I'd be happy to help in whatever way I can. But I just kind of, we've got a couple zoning, like housing zoning things that are in the pipeline now. They're doing very well. I expect them both to pass. So I'm trying to figure out sort of what my next sort of housing stuff is going to look like, because I really want that to be my focus for the time being. And the idea of getting the ball rolling on a trust or something like that seemed like an interesting thing to start working on. So yeah, I just wanted to just put that idea out there, and I'm sure we can discuss it more going forward.
Yeah, I think what I would propose that we do is talk for the partnership to talk about it at our next meeting in June, since we probably won't get to it tonight. And then maybe come back to you with a idea of here's what we're thinking, here's what we could do in our timeline. We could reconvene and meet again if that made sense.
Great.
Can I just add a really quick thing, and apologies for the teenagers in the background. I feel like I and Jana at this also, we're sort of the historians of this partnership because we've been around the block for a while. So just to kind of reflect back, we did look at the idea of starting a housing trust many, many years ago and had a lot of excitement for it, I think, on the partnership, but then the political climate wasn't right. So it's really exciting, actually, to think about this possibility again at a time where there actually is political will and political capital to support it. So, so this is exciting, actually.
And Jenna, I'm not great with technology. So Jenna, what I'm doing now is I'm texting you the affordable housing barriers in Easthampton, and that I sent to the Lieutenant Governor, which are top line. And then there's our experience with programs. And then I used One Ferry Street as an example. So this is what she got. We have a follow-up meeting with Mishan and Jessica Bellevue and somebody from the Department of Community, I don't know, HDC, whatever, to talk about, workforce housing, but also this idea of having a continuum of housing where it maybe starts at 60 or 70% AMI and could go up to 120 to keep people in town. So maybe in 4 years, they can afford to buy a house, the first time home, who knows? And I understand that proposal is very specific to One Ferry and that developer. But I would just end and not take up the rest of the community's time. I was really specific with some affordable housing developers and really appreciated their unique ideas. But I did say Easthampton's economic development and sustainability model for a local economy cannot wait 5 to 6 years for and hold up One Ferry Street as a mixed use commercial development. Like, you're either on board and we will help you with whatever we can do. But I mean, we've got phase 2 starting July 1st. We've got phase 3 starting the next July 1st. And my plea to the representative, the senator, and the LG was, help us find a developer who will do a pilot project that will put this kind of housing that we put forward in the beginning of our Mass Works program. And I get the rule, like, look, I understand. The government changes the rules, like, news to me. But I just also want to be very clear in my conversations with Mishan and the LG. It's like, I can't let this land, I shouldn't say can't let, I can on public will. It's not, I really believe in Easthampton's best interest to let land or possibility at 1 Ferry Street on that campus to lay dormant for 6 to 7 years for the affordable housing cycle to catch up is not something Easthampton can do. So I am pushing for some kind of exception or pilot to make that happen. But we also have some exciting opportunities to get people to buy in through an investment trust, if that's possible, but also some other development possibilities for first-time home buyer and also rentals that can go into condos, because this money is right now kind of flexible. So I know I'm over talking and drinking coffee way too late. So I appreciate the time. I sent that 1 pager for that I sent to the LG for the partnerships consideration. I'm more than happy to come back to a meeting and answer questions. I know Councilor Peak is right there with me, and certainly can throw out a couple of more of the links to the housing cooperatives and contractor cooperatives. That I've literally just been looking at, like, not like, oh, this is what we want to do, because I don't know what's right for the city. You guys know more than I.
So I just want to jump in and just say, Mayor Chappelle and Councilor Peak, I am not a fan of housing trusts for Easthampton, and you have me interested and curious. Thank you guys so much for coming to this meeting. But I'm also hoping that you can share what you're talking about 1 Ferry, because I'm not that familiar. I live in Easthampton. So I think the other fabulous thing about this meeting is, I think if we were going to do something along these lines, I think there would have to be like clear channels and structures for intercommunication between Jeff and Jamie and the council and you. And so I think it's fabulous that you guys were able to attend, because I think that's the beginning kind of developing that kind of strong communication.
Yeah, I mean, the 40-second deal on the 1 Ferry Street development was, we don't have a developer who's very friendly to, capital A, affordable housing. And the middle deal we struck was this workforce initiative housing that actually gave the developer $100,000 to $125,000 per unit. That was based on 80 to, I think, 120 AMI. And that's what we could get. It helped us get the Mass Works grant. We get that, and all of a sudden, the program is not direct cash 100 or between 100 and 125. It's soft debt financing.
Okay.
And the developer then says, well, wait a minute, like, that's not what I signed on to. And then I went back to Mass Works and said, well, we just wrote this really great application that not only did you fund, but you then gave us an extra $391,000 to do more work on. And my developer is like, this isn't my pro forma. This isn't my financing. And I talked them out of doing historical tax credits because they take forever. And he's, the developer's like, well, if I got, but that's the short of it is it's how I've got a developer, we've got a developer who will do affordable housing, capital A, if we put it on a pretty platter. It's not necessarily silver, but it's nice teak, and make it worth his while to make his pro forma work. And right now that money is a little more available and accessible and flexible than it's ever been. And I think that there is a home in place in 1 Ferry for that kind of housing. I think it's low hanging fruit. like even if it's 10 units or 20 units or, you know, or whatnot. And he's not opposed to first-time homebuyer condominiums, but again, it would be how we structure the initiatives. And, you know, there are pros and cons to that, but the pros and cons that I know are like in 10-page papers. They're not, you know, I don't click on the footnotes. So Tom does. I don't.
Sometimes.
So I would happy to, yeah, I'm just throwing it all out. Tom is, you know, and just, you know, Jeff and I and Jamie, we're always, people are like, would you consider this? And would you consider that? And we never want to say no, but we don't have the capacity to look at it. And I just feel like Jackie said, and Jen, like you guys have been holding the torch and the political climate has not always been supportive. And yeah, I think I know there's political support, but also it's pretty easy to paint the picture that Easthampton goes back to the 1960s if we don't do something about housing and the age of our population and who lives in what housing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
Thanks.
coming. Yeah. And I invite you to stay because next we're going to hear from Laura Baker from Valley.
I know. I was going to say I have a meeting at 7 o'clock. I did want to stay, but
I do as well. But thank you so much.
Yeah. No, Laura. I'm sorry to. And again, any smaller conversations or back to this meeting, please develop questions. You know, we can answer via email or whatnot. You know, or maybe even meet under the tents at City Hall with like chips and salsa from La Veracruzana. So
okay.
That would be great.
Thank you all for your efforts and your time and sticking to, I know, which is a very detailed, crucial, but often not dramatic or sexy topic. But I do, if we don't address this, and I know you guys have been saying it for probably a decade, in Easthampton, the place that we love right now, and we love to where it evolved, basically goes away. So if we don't solve this, and we can. And if we can't, Jackie can. Have a good night. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing back.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Peak.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you, Laura, for being so patient because we went way over when you were going to be on the agenda. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Do you
it's kind of a nice segue, actually, about
I know.
the need for affordable housing and pre-development. And then
Yeah, it was interesting listening, and I certainly do know a fair amount about community land trusts. There have been efforts. There was a Northampton area community land trust for about 20 years. There was a community land trust in Franklin County. In all cases, they went basically bust. So I would take a hard look at why that happened and kind of what the challenge is with maintaining and sustaining the cooperative model. I think Burlington is a good example of a place where it's working. And I think it's largely an issue of scale. You know, they got up to a scale where they have enough houses in the land trust that it is kind of, it has its own momentum to keep going. The small land trusts that have been started in our area, and there's actually a new one in Amherst as well, have been yeomans. I mean, they've been a ton of volunteer effort, produced maybe 2 or 3 units that then no one really wants to monitor and manage over time. So I wouldn't do that. But I'm a big fan. I've lived in cooperative housing myself. I'm a big fan of it, and it would be interesting to figure out a model that works. But in our area, both the co-housing that exists, it's just challenging. There's something about the United States and the American mentality, I think, it's hard for people to share. And that's really what you need to do for cooperative living. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. So I'm Laura Baker. I'm the real estate project manager at Valley Community Development Corporation. Before that, I was at the Hilltown Community Development Corporation. I have done some work in the way past in Easthampton with the CDBG program, ran a housing rehab program for a number of years. I'm a native of Northampton, so I'm pretty familiar with the area. My joining tonight is kind of twofold. I wanted to get the partnership's kind of feedback and input on a proposal that we have in draft form for the CPA. And also it is our hope that at the end of that, we can get a letter of support from the partnership for this application. So Jeff and I have been talking back and forth over at least the last year about this type of initiative. And so I'm going to run through it. I know I sent a kind of wordy document. This is a PowerPoint with fewer words, but basically the same stuff. So I'm going to share screen. 1 second. All right, how are we doing?
Great.
Good. So again, this is a proposed CPA funded activity, Easthampton Affordable Housing Pre-Development Project. And for me, there's a big difference between planning and pre-development. So planning, I would characterize as the housing preservation plan that was recently produced for Easthampton, which looks at data, need, demand, opportunities, and challenges. Pre-development explores the feasibility of particular sites for particular housing uses. And I see pre-development as the bridge between planning and construction. And I'm hearing in the mayor's comments and certainly talking with Jeff that the will is there to have affordable housing and the planning has been done, but something is not happening to get as much housing into construction as people in town might like to see. So the goal of this pre-development activity would be to create new affordable apartments at a scale that's financially feasible for development and financially sustainable during operations. And that magic number is in fact between 30 to 50 apartments. It is not that you cannot build things smaller. It just is getting harder, especially as construction costs continue to escalate. It's harder to make the small projects work. That these apartments would serve a range of income tiers, have a range of unit sizes from studios to 3 bedrooms, be perpetually deed restricted for 99 years. Most, if not all, would be eligible for DHCD's subsidized housing inventory. We would include some fully accessible units, achieve high energy efficient standards, and provide on-site services and amenities as needed. This being what is being described here is not super innovative. This is kind of the tried and true path for affordable housing development. And we're perfectly willing to bend and look at something that might be a little more innovative. I don't think any of our communities are in danger of creating too much affordable housing. And so I wouldn't say going in one direction necessarily precludes going in another direction. This is what we have done. It's what we did pretty much at Parsons Village. And so we have found this to be an effective way to travel. We would be looking for a site and we would have some minimum criteria for that site, which are listed here. Sufficient size, water and sewer, no nasty hazardous materials, ability to manage stormwater on site, which is actually becoming an increasingly large challenge in developed areas. Zoning would have to be made available or could become available for the site, and that the property is in fact for sale and at a reasonable price. We tend to not be able to pay more than appraised value when we work with public money. On top of those kind of basic criteria, there are some things that we would prefer, and I'm interested again, and I'll run through this, but then I'm interested in what people think about these. We tend to like a walkable location, near a bus line, close to other transit, bike trail and things. We prefer a patient property seller, so we don't have to rush to acquire something super early in the process. A site that can accommodate on-site amenities, a site that has the potential for future expansion, And if it's a building that we're reusing, it is much easier if it's not historic. We've worked with historic buildings as well. And a site that can allow us to do some high energy efficiency and maybe favorable to the use of photovoltaics. So there are 7 tasks that I identified in the kind of scope of work for this pre-development activity. The first has to do with identifying sites, and some of this work happened as part of the housing production plan. I think there were 4 sites that were looked at within that plan. In this case, the city's asked us to look both at some municipal sites, particularly the former schools, as well as private property. And the product would be a map, basically identifying those different sites. The meat of the heart of it really lies here in the site feasibility analysis. So you want to start with kind of a long list of potential sites. And you want to fairly quickly winnow that down and be able to strike off the ones that for some reason are not going to prove feasible and pull the ones to the top that may be feasible. So that is, it's part art, part science, but we look at all kinds of issues: zoning, cost, utilities, who the neighbors are, distance to amenities and transportation, traffic impacts, etc. And so we would want to identify the preferred sites in consultation with other stakeholders, in particular, probably the city planning department, as well as with this partnership. And the work products would be basically an inventory of these sites, as well as preliminary budgets, because hand in glove with all of the physical site feasibility issues are financial issues. And you want to work them both forward kind of in tandem. So the third task is also a really critical one. It's called site control. It doesn't mean you have to buy property. It can mean that you have an option, a purchase and sale, a long-term lease agreement, or in fact, you own it. So we would want to negotiate site control with whatever the preferred site is. And if that couldn't be accomplished, we'd want to move to the next most favorable site until we could get a site that we in fact had site control for. Barking dogs. Without site control, it's hard to invest a lot into a given site. And often Valley will work with various pre-development lenders. Sometimes actually we work with CPA monies, CDBG monies, as well as something called CDAC. No one wants to give us those monies, pretty much, if we don't have site control. The danger is you invest money into planning and then the site goes away. It's sold to someone else or whatever. It's no longer available. So the work product is some kind of agreement that establishes site control for a price and at a timeline that's suitable for the project. Preliminary site and building designs, we typically work schematic phase site plans and conceptual phase building plans. At this stage, the site plan is really the driver because that's what you need to take to zoning. And it tends to be less fungible than building designs, especially new construction building designs. So it means hiring an architect and a landscape architect, a civil engineer, to assist with preparing those plans. Zoning and permitting, can be very complex. It can be relatively simple. It really depends on the site and the project. Often we work with Chapter 40B, which allows us to ask for a waiver of all local zoning regulations and rules. It's a little controversial, but it is sometimes the way to get increased density on a site. And then there may well be other permits required, conservation permit, historic permit, whatever it is particular to that site. So the work product is basically a kind of laundry list of these different permits as well as permit applications. Community participation, engaging various stakeholders in the process. Public and private groups, including your group, neighbors and abutters, municipal boards, social service providers, and the general public. And it can take many forms: public meetings, presentations, press, articles, and often town websites. And so that's one of the many ways that towns and partnerships can assist, is by basically being a conduit for information, holding that information that's coming in from the public and going out from a particular developer. Financing, So once you kind of know what it is you want to build and what it's going to cost, you raise money. And that's a little bit what the mayor was talking about with One Ferry Street is they know what they want to build and the money is not working right now. So in our field, typically there are multiple sources in a given project. Local money often comes in early and is a very small part of the overall development cost. And it helps to leverage state and federal dollars, which tend to be the larger funds in a project. So the product is a rental housing financing packet that is good to go, that we can ship out to these various funders and is credible to raise money. We're proposing an 18-month schedule from the initial contract time and also to work with city staff to coordinate the work that we would do with an RFP that they're starting to work on preparing for the surplus schools that are kind of coming on the horizon. The budget that we've proposed includes basically a mix of money for kind of staff with the largest kind of pot of money for third-party pre-development costs. And we're leaving it as a pot of money because each site will want different things. So one site may really want, a wetlands analysis. Another site might really want a topographical survey. Another site might really want a traffic study. So it's responsive. We want it to be flexible so it can be responsive to the sites that we are evaluating. Most of this money is proposed to be from CPA. There's some in-kind contribution, staff and supervision time from Valley that's also proposed. And that's my spiel. Really wanting to get questions and feedback from you folks. And then if you need to get in touch with me, my contact information is here. But I think I'll stop sharing the screen so that we can see each other again.
May I just say that that was a fabulous presentation, and I'm not on steroids. It was a very succinct, it was the best explanation of the development of affordable housing I have actually ever seen. That was my only comment, but it was just clear and awesome. Email it to me. I'm going to steal it down the line, but
feel free. All for the cause.
You did email it to me. I have it.
Yeah, that was great, Laura. Thank you. Do folks have questions, comments? Jeff?
I have one. I had really hoped that the mayor and Tom Peake would have been able to stay for that. I'm going to kind of plug and ask them to take a review of this because it was really important. I think, Laura and I have talked for a while. This is a way for the city to take some real control over the process, and I think it's really essential. I think it goes along with what we were talking about at the first part of the meeting, which is these different all these different things working together at the same time. It's an immense amount of work. It's crazy, but it's like a really essential thing that we should be doing. And I would hope that this committee would support the request to CPA. And I think, we talked about CPA or not CPA, but one of the when CPA works for us, one of the good things about it is it raises a lot of awareness along the way. So you're going to raise the awareness of the CPA members, you're going to educate them, and then it goes to city council. And that's a really important, it really takes what Councilor Peake is saying is there's this will, and it really gives them this real opportunity to hear all of that. And I talked to Laura, I think, the intricacy that we're working out, I think right now is just the relationship with the schools, because we have another consultant who's on board to do the RFP process. But the two projects, if we can line them up, the timelines especially, and the work scopes, like this will be really valuable, because some of the work that Laura and Valley can do to inform the RFP, we can make this RFP really good, and we can make it really strong, and we can know that what we're asking for is actually doable, or we can now understand what constraints are before we release the RFP. So there's a really great opportunity to build these two projects together over the next 12 to 18 months. But then I think the rest of it, what Laura's saying, just going out and looking at sites, that to me is taking the housing production plan and taking the next step in. and like Laura said, bridging the gap between planning and building. So, I was always really excited about this. I think the pandemic just kind of interrupted our conversations, Laura, and now we're here now. So I think it's great. That's about all I want to say. I think this is a really good opportunity and a good time to try to push this in and see what we can do.
I'm sorry, Jeff, can you just clarify this proposal though is just for you evaluating the schools, not other sites in Easthampton?
There's two projects that are going to kind of run concurrently. So the one that Laura was capturing would also look at private property and other parcels. Kind of like what it was really interesting to hear the mayor say that, if we found a parcel and there's the American Rescue Plan funds that would allow us to buy a piece of land that would actually be suitable, and this is really good timing that the words that keep coming out of the state programs and everything is shovel ready, and this would help us look through sites, find one, and get us shovel ready. We're also doing that. We just happen to also be doing that for the schools too. So some of Laura's research would also feed the school program, the project, but there are two elements here.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
So this is just for my own curiosity, Laura. Is there a preference to work with structures that already exist, or would it be, so you would prefer flat land, like to just start from scratch? Okay.
I would, but it doesn't always play out that way, because really what I prefer is a really good location above all else. And so for us, a good location often has to do with centrality, transportation and utilities. And so by definition, you're talking about probably an already developed area. So it can go either way.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, it's easier and often cheaper to just build it new. If you're trying to meet the stretch code and the state requirements and the accessibility requirements, we get a lot of requirements to meet, many masters. But again, I would wrestle with renovation for a good location.
Maybe this is a question for Jeff or Jamie, but so would Valley's pre-development work on the school building to help inform the RFP process then make Valley ineligible to respond to the RFP if you were interested in responding to the RFP or not?
We're hoping to work out a level of coordination where we would not become ineligible, because we'd like to be eligible to potentially bid on the school buildings. And I think the city would like that as well. There is a shortage of affordable housing developers.
Right.
So we have lots of cities and towns that have the will and the interest, and it's a good problem for us to have, but it does take a long time. And so there just isn't enough capacity to go around.
Yeah.
One of the arguments for financing a pre-development study like this, to be very frank, is you hold our attention. When other cities and towns are like, over here, we've got this great old school, come and do it. And I've done similar pre-development studies. It's probably about the fourth time. All of them have resulted in housing being built. Now, it doesn't happen quickly. Mayor Chappelle's talking about it just doesn't, in my experience, happen quickly. But you can't finish what you don't start. And so you have to start somewhere. And to me, this is a really strong start. And again, it has, in fact, led to creation of affordable housing. So this proposal is almost exactly the proposal we sent to this town of Amherst probably 3 years ago. They wanted single room occupancy, homeless housing in town. They don't have any. And they've been wanting it for years, 15, 20 years of identifying the need and saying why it's important and yada, yada. So we proposed a pre-development study that paid for shopping for property in Amherst, which is very difficult. analyzing a couple properties. We put offers on several properties that we lost because people will pay crazy amounts of cash in Amherst. And then ultimately we went way the heck out on a limb and just bought a property because the market was so hot. Valley, we took on the loan to acquire the property. And then we've been working through zoning, and now we're waiting on our final financing, which we're pretty confident about. So if that all comes in, we'll start to build in the spring, and there will be actual apartments for people, which is where we want to get to. So that's the point of all this. We have no interest in another binder or folder or thing that is on paper. People can't live in file folders, and so this is just to get to the housing. That's what we're about. So.
Yeah, and I think just because I think it would come up as we go to CPA and City Council, the same question. So one of the things that we talked about was the information or due diligence or whatever the findings are would get made public, be available to everybody who would be interested in potentially looking at the school project, and it would go, it'd kind of be the conduit to the RFP committee and that sort of thing, and then it would be on a website made available to everybody. So that's kind of how we would present that, is that it's not information that would go nowhere. It would be presented to the city and then be made available for everyone else once the RFP is released. So that's kind of the goal for that. That's for the school part. The other projects, it might be a little bit different, but for the schools, it would be that way.
Yeah, you will have more success with attracting developers if you have good quality information to share with them.
Kate, did you have a question?
Laura, I apologize. I did not. It was on my to-do list to pre-read this, but I did not. And so just based on what the mayor was talking about with 1 Ferry Street, is there any way that would be included in this? And the reason why I mention that is it has actually always been slightly painful to me that 1 Ferry Street seems like such a fabulous spot for an affordable housing location. And so it's a question you might not have the answer for, but in my mind, I would actually love a little pre-development on this in case the current developer backs out on the other 2 properties. And I don't know, Jeff, if you want to speak to that, but that was just one of the questions that popped up.
The only thing I'll throw out, I guess, is that 1 Ferry is far enough along that it kind of is all tangled. Like, I would just imagine it's tangled up in weird, like, not weird. It's tangled up with multiple conversations and multiple timelines. So, maybe that's a conversation we have. Maybe, like, Lori, maybe you can think about that. But there is something about turning to like a clearer path. The path is not clear over there, and that may be something we can vet a little bit more to kind of answer that. I think that's a good question, Kate. I think all of this is like questions that we might get moving forward through a public process to secure the money. But I think it's just a little bit more tangled up over there than especially a site that's currently listed for sale, for example. They're actively trying to sell it. Whereas the developer for 1 Ferry Street, I don't think is actively trying to sell anything. Is trying to just get enough funding to build. So it's a little bit apples and oranges maybe, but I think it goes on a list of things we would explore as we kind of move forward. The one question I did have, maybe as a group, and Laura, hopefully this doesn't, I'm not trying to, it's not a hard question, but we want to probably try to act fast, because I think if we wanted to pick up your proposal and match it with the schools is kind of just about to kind of like pop out as a project coming up. So, the Affordable Housing Partnership a letter would be kind of requested to accompany the CPA request. But then Jamie, could we, it's kind of late, could we get this into the June CPA meeting? Because for expenditures over a certain amount, they want to have 2 meetings. So, I don't know what we want to wait till July to get it to CPA, because then it's just the timeline just kind of like gets a lot longer. But maybe let's talk about CPA schedule real quick.
Yeah. So the June CPA meeting is June 17th. And I try to get everything to the committee the week before. So June 10th would be the absolute sort of last date to get an application to them, because they get on the agenda, things like that. But if there was, I mean, we can make exceptions as well. If the application isn't fully ready for CPA, just coming to them for one meeting to propose it, talk about it, give them some things to talk about, or some ideas about what it would be about. And then coming back at the next meeting with, here's the full budget, here's the full application, should satisfy their requirements for doing it in 2 meetings. The other thing is that in the summer, the city council meets less frequently. At least historically, they've met less frequently.
Yeah.
So what I've noticed is that projects that sort of go to city council in July or August, it doesn't really matter if, it's going to take them a longer time to get their 2 or 3 meetings at city council. So it may not be, regardless of when you submit, it might not come to city council, get approved by city council until September. Unless they're willing to change their process.
I'm happy to work toward a June 10th submission, Jamie. I feel like we're pretty far along, so you can tell me if you think the application needs more work.
No, I mean, I looked through it and I think it's great. I think it hits everything that they're looking for.
So letters of support, we may not get as many if we go in sooner, but the critical one, I think, is from this body, is from the Housing Partnership to go in with a CPA application.
And I will also say that, I think that the application asks for letters of support, but I don't think that the committee actually puts that much weight in the letters of support, that they're more interested in seeing people come to the meeting.
Don't care if we support the project.
No, I mean they do, but having the Housing Partnership show up at the CPA meeting would take the place of a letter of support. Having the mayor at the meeting or city councilors present at the CPA would show support in the same way that they're looking for as a letter. So, if there are other people whom you're not able to get a letter of support from in time to submit with the application, having them come to the meeting to just, say that they support the project would be helpful.
I would be happy to write a letter of support. Do other folks if we have to vote on that? I need approval from all of you to be able to do that, if anyone wants to.
I'd like to make a motion that the Easthampton Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership write a letter of support for Valley CEC's proposal to the CPA.
Second that motion.
I third it.
I also agree.
Jenna, would that be something that you would just do, or would it be like on behalf of the entire partnership?
Usually I write it on behalf of the partnership. Sometimes the applicant will send me, something that they particularly want me to write, but usually I just write it on behalf of everyone if everyone's in agreement. If anyone wants to read it, I'm happy to send it around. But
do you guys feel like there are any areas that we should fine tune in terms of priorities? Income, the program, the income of people served, the size of units, some of the location priorities. Is it matching up with what you guys think are priorities for Easthampton?
I do. I mean, I think, I'm always focused on units for people at the lowest income level. So, being able to serve folks at 30%, which is the hardest part really, but I know Valley, you guys have a good track record of doing that. So, no, I mean, I like the bedroom mix. I think the bus route part is tricky in an area with such poor transportation, and that came up during Parsons Village about the bus route and was it on a bus route, and
it means a lot to the state funders. So it's challenging.
Can you come out and look to see where goes.
Like it to be on a modal transit stop, location.
We don't have a commuter rail station in Easthampton.
Right.
Can I just ask what other housing partnership members think about the minimum 30 units piece, if that's going to get stuck anywhere? I have PTSD still from Parsons Village.
38.
What do you speak more to what your concern is?
So the proposal that Valley has drafted, let me just go to this particular spot, says, sorry, I just had it in front of me. So essential site characteristics include buildable land area of sufficient size for development of a minimum of 30 units. So that's right at off the beginning of their proposal for what they'd be looking for. And I think that's, me as a member of this body and person who thinks about this thinks that's great, but I always want us to think about, is that going to be something that will be a challenge going forward? And how can we?
So my experience, Jackie, is nobody cares how many units it is until you tell where you're going to build it.
Yep.
And then it's a terrible idea. And so when it comes out in a vanilla thing like this, everybody's like, oh, no skin off my nose. It does then become something we can fall back on as a developer and say, look, we vetted this scale with, the city's paid us to go out and shop for this scale of project. And, we can fall back on it. It doesn't have to be 30 units, but it's better to aim high and kind of whittle down than to try to go the other way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I just think that
yeah, that's the controversy.
Sometimes it definitely scares people. So, back when we did do Parsons Village and I wrote a letter of support in the paper, the neighborhood I live in is equally that dense, literally in my backyard. So, I think that I guess what I'm trying to say is I just want us to go in with our eyes open of anything that we might have to defend. That's all.
Yep.
And I think that, not to bring this up again, but as we pointed out, this is a long process. And if we got accepted to the Cpa Municipal Engagement Initiative and we knew that we were going to have an affordable housing development at 50 units, Cpa can help us with some technical assistance about building a base of support and talking about why we need 50 units versus 10 units. And so I think that we have, because we know this will take a while, if we do get that technical support, we'll be able to really use this. This is the project we're working on, right? Like this is the thing that's going to come before us that we need to be able to be ready to bring out more community members and neighbors to talk about it. And I think, Laura, be prepared. There could be some CPA or council members who ask you like, well, how come you can't do it at 15 units? But I actually think right now the CPA committee will love this idea. And I think that the city council will love this idea. So I think
again, it's everybody loves affordable housing until you cite it.
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah. The good news, I think it is a preview. What Jackie's saying is to be able to defend it, but the political will, the momentum, the planning efforts, and the reality, when we do a reality check, housing production plan says we're supposed to produce 38 units a year. And we're talking about one project that, if we get 40 units or something like that, how, people need to really face the fact that we want to be doing this every year, which, it's nearly impossible, but to start to set this as a more normal standard and expectation. I think Jackie's right, but I think now we have just kind of, there might be a moment in time where we try real hard to get a couple projects through. So I'm pretty excited. That's all. I just wanted to add that. Sorry.
You might hear from folks who talk about seniors. That's been, it's been clear. I think that's, the mayor was talking about that. It's been the EDIC has been talking about that. It was I mean, I don't want to speak for the partnership, but like, I don't want to limit it to seniors, but I do think you might hear people say, well, we need senior housing, so why can't it be for senior, you know, like talk about the need for senior housing.
I've developed a number of senior housing developments when towns have identified that as their top priority. I didn't get that out of the housing production plan, that was the number one need. And the other thing is we do house a lot of seniors in family housing. So, I mean, we're all getting older. And so lots of people in their 60s and 70s that are in different kinds of affordable housing. So it does help with that segment of the population as well. They're not excluded. And we tend to put in a lot more handicapped accessible units than, you know, typically you would find in development. And so again, that helps that mobility impaired sector who tend to be older as well.
And I wanted to just pick up on the housing, the sort of accessible units. And I think that is really good. I would encourage, if possible, looking at universal designs.
Yes.
You know, because having accessible units is one thing, and there's strict standards, but just.
Yep. So all of our new construction is what they call visitable, which means if you have a friend or family member in a wheelchair, they can come and see you in your housing. When you reuse old buildings is when you tend to come up against situations where maybe not everything is visitable. And sometimes those townhouse models, like, you know, 90% of them are visitable, but not every single one. But yeah, it's a high priority for us and for the state.
Yeah, good. And the other thing I would add is the housing production plan did include those 4 sort of, I don't know, feasibility analysis of on the private properties, and that was approved by city council, accepted by city council and the mayor. So, you know, I think
those are big developments,
right? And going back to Jackie's idea that there's going to be this pushback when people find out what the site is, I think it has been approved, and that, you know, if it's not affordable housing, it's going to be market rate housing, and look at all the market rate housing that can happen on these sites. So just putting that out there as another. I don't know, another excuse or another way to hit back at the naysayers. But
yeah, I wouldn't self-censor at this
Gotta go,
point.
guys. I'm sorry.
okay.
Great. Any other comments or questions for Laura? I will get the letter of support over to you.
Thank you.
Jamie, here's my quick question. Sorry. Will Laura have the opportunity to do that whole awesome PowerPoint presentation for CPA? Because that would be amazing.
Yes, if she wants to put that in she will have an opportunity to make a presentation to CPA. So I thought that was a really good presentation as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I liked it too. You're going to have to do it at city council as well. So you're going to do it.
I used to hate PowerPoint. Now I'm
more
like,
times.
It's not so bad. No, I mean, I'll just that includes probably some of our affordable housing developments. That was pretty dry, despite of the pops of color. But I would do something that includes some pictures of recent developments, because that's really what people want to see. They want to see.
But I think the thing that your presentation did, Laura, that we always struggle with is it really just laid out the complexity in a way that's accessible to folks. You know, why is it so hard? Everyone always asks, why is it so hard to build affordable housing? Yeah. Why is it so expensive? And I think you're starting to get at that with that presentation in a way that makes people really get it. And the more we can do that, the better.
Yeah. I mean, what's happening at 1 Ferry Street is entirely predictable. Private developers do not, in fact, want to build affordable housing, and in fact, renege on it whenever they can. And, you know, nonprofit developers, 100% of our units are affordable. That's why we're building it. So it's such a different orientation that you start from. Yeah. So you need both, but it's just a very different game. with a private developer.
I was not surprised when it turned out that there was not going to be workforce housing.
Whoops. I know.
Just saying.
Whoops. And we have, in fact, met with mill owners. I've done pro formas for one set of mill owners. And again, in the end, they like the idea of getting the resources. They don't like the idea of the restrictions and constraints. And it's not a profitable industry, honestly. So,
Right.
That's the deal. We kind of break even if we can. So that doesn't drive private sector investment very much.
Right. That's why we need Valley CDC.
So,
And others. You guys, I think Easthampton has such an interesting variety of housing stock. You guys shouldn't sell yourself short. I mean, Treehouse is a one of a kind. I mean, it's a national model.
Right.
It's pretty wild. So, just saying.
No, and I think we're in a really interesting and exciting place right now that it's, you know, scary because housing prices are going crazy, but it also is getting people's attention in a way that we haven't always been very successful at. So
I agree.
Can I ask one more question? At the end of your presentation, Laura, you sort of end with you develop the pro forma and get some funding or the funding sources lined up. And I know that CPA is going to ask, okay, well then what's the next step? Is Valley then going to do the development at those properties, or is it going to be handed off, or what? So just putting it out there that was left a little bit hanging at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. Well, in 18 months, it's a great comment. In 18 months, you only get so far, but yes, our whole purpose is to build the housing. And I think when you have someone who is as invested as a developer doing the pre-development planning, it's very different than having someone else doing it who doesn't have that same eye for what's going to work. It's just like you always want your property manager there when you're designing because they have to manage the property. You want that continuity of people who are going to have to own the problem are there kind of at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think
when cities and towns plan affordable housing, it's usually a nightmare for the affordable housing developers because they don't know what's realistic and they put everything in and you're like, it's impossible to build. And you go, no, So I don't recommend cities and towns become developers. I think your job is to set the table and we'll come and build it. And it's resources. It's a lot. The hardest part of my job is neighborhood opposition. It's the hardest part, but it's painful and it's unpredictable and you can't control it. And it has its own time. There's no timeline that works for how long people are going to be mad about it. So having people turn out, having a YIMBY group and having people turn out is incredibly effective and important. It's the only way we're building what we're going to build in Amherst because there were literally 150 people who turned out to say they basically shamed the other people into submission and just drove it home. Without that, we would be probably in lawsuits.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm sure that Jeff has mentioned to you, Laura, but the City Council is amending our affordable housing zoning. The council meeting to approve the zone change or this ordinance change will be on June 16th, the day before the CPA meeting. And that would make affordable housing projects by site plan approval as opposed to special permit. And we'll see, but my sort of feeling is if we can work within the zoning, then and we don't have to go through a 40B process and we can do it by site plan approval, then that eliminates a lot of opposition.
So the longest lawsuit that we had at Valley was over an approval APR. So you can sue anything. But yeah, it's always great to have if there's less distance to travel between what you're asking for and the normal zoning, it's a little easier for the general public to accept it. The bigger that difference is, the harder it gets as a general rule. But, you know, it's absolutely random who you get next door and what they're going to do. So, but having a strong contingent that will turn out at meetings, because we will need you, it's huge.
And we've definitely been building that. We don't have what Amherst has yet, but we'll work on it.
Yeah, Amherst has these buttons. I'll have someone here. You know, I support affordable housing. And by the end of the giant public meetings around this project in Amherst, the people who opposed us were also wearing the buttons because they too supported affordable housing, just not this thing that we were proposing.
That's what they always say. I'm not opposed to affordable housing.
No, I love affordable housing. Yeah. If only you do it right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was kind of the funniest. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Laura, very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure. It's good to meet you all. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
All right.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave too. I'm going to put my kids to bed.
Okay.
But thank you. This is great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your time. And
thanks for coming.
June, I guess mark your calendars. Maybe
Already on it.
like so June 6th, it's a busy week. June 16th is the public hearing for, like Jamie said, for these zoning amendments. So that would be meaningful. And then maybe a little presence at the CPA meeting too the next night too. So
Okay.
Okay.
all right. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good night.
Night.
So I had bumped the agenda to approve the meeting notes, but now we don't have a quorum. So we'll have to
That's
do that
okay. We can do it next month.
next month. And so I don't want to belabor our meeting because we're already like, this is like the longest meeting we've had in 3 years. But our next meeting is June 24th. I might not be here, but I can be here. I'm on vacation that week. Because I do think that we need to meet in June to talk about all of the things that we just heard about and really figure out how we want to get back to the mayor and Councilor Peak with like the list of things that they asked us to look at and come back to a proposal. So let's do that on our June 24th meeting.
I mean, Jana, if you want, if you can prepare stuff, I can go through the motions of the meeting. I mean, there's no reason that one of us can't do it for you. I think
that's true.
You should.
Thank you. I don't have to be at the next meeting. I mean, I'd probably we're going to the Cape, but I'm probably driving home. So we will still meet on the 24th and whether or not I'm here or not. And actually, Jackie, so you know, Brad is going to be our representative on the school reuse committee.
Well,
awesome. Thank you.
I don't know for sure yet. I still have to chat with him more in depth, but yeah.
Wow.
Who's him?
Jeff.
Oh, okay. You want me to put in a good word for you?
I already did.
You to do it, so I'm pretty sure you're going to be on it.
I mean, it's a spot reserved for one of us, and there's only so many of us, so it's going to be one of us for sure.
It's going to be you. It's going to be great. All right. So I guess my only other comment would be like, you can actually watch the recording. Brad's going to do the notes, but just think about the things that they asked us to do, and so that we can try to come back together with some type of cohesive response.
Sure.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. It's exciting.
It wasn't as long as a community action board meeting, Jana. So.
Well, I've said this before, but when I go to those Amherst Affordable Housing Trust meetings, OMG, it's like I'm the first person on the agenda and it takes an hour and a half. And then they're going on till like 10 p.m. I'm always like, my housing part is members would abandon me way before this.
Serious business in Amherst.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All
Thanks,
right.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.